Hey guys! So I got a request to do a video about bipolar and alcoholism, and I have never really addressed that, so I thought that I would here, and of course I'm going to give my personal experience like I always do, and just kind of talk about it a little bit in general. I think it's fairly common in bipolar disorder to have substance abuse issues, whether that's alcohol or different types of drugs, or even other things that aren't substance abuse, things like gambling or, um, the often quoted overly sexual behavior. And so I really see all of that as being kind of all related, I guess you could say, because when you're really up here, like I see it as like a sensory seeking thing that pushes people to go and sort of heighten their experience by drinking, doing drugs, getting with people, gambling, whatever. Why? Well, because when you're up here, you want that adrenaline rush, you want the excitement, the novelty, the newness, and that's what pushes you to go and do those things. And so drinking excessively, more so when you're around people because that kind of like heightens it, or doing different kinds of drugs and things that are gonna, again, heighten your sensory experience. So I think when you're elevated and when you're up, that's what makes that behavior kind of common in those situations. But then on the flip side of the coin, when you're really down, people can do the exact same kinds of things, but for a different reason. It's more to numb the feelings or to cope with the negative feelings. So over here, you're doing it to heighten your feelings, and over here, you're doing it to kind of numb your feelings or to feel a little bit better about those bad feelings. So people might drink a lot to forget their problems or do drugs to, again, escape from the reality of life, of the pain that they are dealing with. And so I think either way, it can be problematic because for a lot of people, it doesn't take much to get hooked on it because, and I'm talking more specifically drugs and alcohol, not just specifically like alcoholism. But I think both of them are really, it's really easy to just have a few experiences of having it make you feel better before it becomes reinforced in your brain. And so, well, if I do this, it's going to make me feel good. If I do this, this is the result. And so it's like this circular pattern going around and around and around. And addictions are really very complex. And I learned quite a bit about addictions many years ago and all the processes that go on in your brain with addictions. And it's not just a chemical thing, it's also a social thing too. Your environment and stuff plays a part in any kind of drug addiction, alcoholism, that kind of thing. So I think it's really complicated because there are so many factors involved in it, and you can't just like cut it down and say, well, this is why that person drinks and this is what they need to do to fix it. It's like very multifaceted, and I think also it's because it is so reinforced biologically, chemically in your brain, that once you go down that path, I think it's a lot harder to get off of it, and that you will probably be more likely to keep coming back to it in the future. And I think, again, that's why people tend to relapse into these things, either way, when you're up or when you're down, in bipolar disorder specifically. Probably more so during the down periods. I'm not 100% sure about when people are up, because people don't talk too much about that kind of experiences when they're really manic or really whatever. I think it's a lot more so that people use it to cope with their problems and to cope with the pain and the negative stuff. And in my experience, that is the case. I have never done any kind of hardcore drugs, but I have had somewhat of an issue with alcohol in the past. I wouldn't say I was an alcoholic, but I had a period of, I don't even know, a year, year and a half, where my drinking just steadily increased. And I've always been kind of a social drinker, you know. And when I was young, of course, I would drink excessively and binge drink and stuff. And even as I got a little bit older, I'd still go out and binge drink and stuff, which is not good, but I didn't do it all the time. It was just once in a while. But as my mood started becoming more and more and more depressed, I found myself drinking more and more and more and more. And so it would start out with just, you know, one beer every now and then. Well, then it became two, and then three, and four, and five. And before I knew it, I was drinking probably the equivalent of like 5 to 6 beers every day to every other day. So, yeah, I would easily go through an 18 pack or more of beer in a week or less. And I'm a very small person, as you can see. So that was a lot to go from nothing to just going up here. And, you know, that's in part because you build up a tolerance. You know, you need to have more in order to get the same effect. And I used it just like I described a minute ago, as a numbing effect from the negative feelings that I felt. Because I was so depressed, I couldn't deal with life, I couldn't cope with things. And by drinking, I would become very kind of sedated, and eventually I would drink enough that I would just get sleepy and fall asleep and just kind of be like in La La Land, right? And so that feeling of calm and peacefulness became, you know, I needed that. I wanted that. And so I kept drinking again every day or every other day for a long time. And I I wasn't going out and drinking. I was drinking in my house by myself. And you know, they say, I laugh, it's not funny, but they say, like, that's one of the signs you have a drinking problem, right? You drink alone. Well, I totally did. I would just drink alone. Like, my kids would go to sleep, I would start drinking until I fell asleep. And I stopped drinking when I found out I was pregnant with my son, because I was like, there's no way I'm going to harm my son by continuing to drink like this. And so I just went cold turkey and I stopped. And so now, because I know that it's a slippery slope for me, and I try to avoid alcohol now for the most part. I've only drank a handful of times since my son has been born. He's almost 2. And mainly it's like when I have gone out to eat or something, I have like one drink. And I did drink too much on New Year's, but that was New Year's and whatever. But it's kind of bad because those few times that I had even just one drink, the feelings that I started to feel is like I could easily see how that would turn into another one and another one and another one. And so I have to like cut it off and be like, no, you don't need it anymore. And so I consciously and purposely avoid it now because I don't want to go there. I don't want to be addicted to alcohol. No, I don't want to. And that is the same reason that I avoid drugs, because sometimes I crave, you know, the sensations that you would get from doing drugs. And to be honest, I've never actually done any hardcore drugs. So I talked about this in a video before about craving drugs when you're, you know, in a certain mind, your mind is in a certain state. But I always avoid going out and seeking that out because I know for a fact if I did it once, it would go downhill like this and I'd be like strung out, and I would not want that for my children or myself. So I think it is a big issue for people with bipolar disorder because, you know, we're dealing with all these upheaval of emotions, and it becomes a way of numbing and evening and sometimes heightening the good feelings and numbing the bad feelings. But it's a really very complex issue that I don't think people can deal with necessarily just on their own. I think people, for the most part, if they have an issue with that, need to get some kind of outside assistance in kicking the habit if that's what they truly want to do. But you also can't make somebody do something that they don't want to do. It has to be an internal feeling of knowing you need to stop and having the desire and the motivation to do that.